The Cinnamon Challenge. On March 10th, 2012, a 16-year-old girl attempted the Cinnamon Challenge, a viral dare to swallow a spoonful of dry cinnamon without water. She filled a spoon with ground cinnamon and tipped it into her mouth in one motion. As she tried to swallow, the powder coated her throat. She exhaled sharply and a cloud of cinnamon left her mouth, but a large portion remained. She attempted to breathe in through her mouth, pulling the powder deeper. The fine particles entered her airway and lungs. She began coughing repeatedly, but the coughs did not restore airflow. Her breathing became shallow and less effective. People around her believed the reaction was part of the challenge until she collapsed to the floor. Paramedics found her with inadequate breathing effort and transported her to a hospital. The cinnamon particles triggered swelling and chemical irritation in the lungs, blocking oxygen transfer. Once the lower airways filled with powder and edema, ventilation could not compensate. She developed respiratory failure and died later from complications of the lung injury. The fatal mechanism was asphyxia and irreversible lung damage caused by inhalation of dry powder during the attempt to complete the challenge. The event demonstrated that even a brief exposure to cinnamon in the airway can create an airway obstruction severe enough to stop gas exchange, leading to death despite rapid transport and medical care. The Ice Bucket Challenge. On August 23, 2014, 18-year-old Cameron Lancaster attempted an ice bucket challenge imitation, replacing the act of pouring ice water over the body with a jump into a flooded quarry at Preston Hill Quarry in Scotland. He stood on a rock ledge above deep open water while friends recorded. He announced the attempt and jumped feet first from height into the quarry pool. The water was extremely cold and significantly deeper than it appeared from above. The sudden temperature change triggered an involuntary gasp under the surface. Because his head and chest were submerged when the reflex occurred, water entered his airway instead of air. He did not resurface after the initial entry. Friends waited but saw no movement or bubbles. Emergency services were called, and search teams entered the quarry. Divers later located his body at depth. The cause of death was drowning with cold water shock, listed as the initiating event. The cold forced loss of breathing control, preventing him from swimming or resurfacing. Once water filled the lungs, oxygen exchange stopped, and circulation failed. The fatal outcome occurred because he replaced a controlled ice water pour with a high-risk jump into deep, cold, unmonitored water without flotation, rescue support, or an exit plan. The Chubby Bunny Challenge. On June 11, 2006, 12-year-old Catherine Feeney attempted the Chubby Bunny Challenge, a game in which players insert marshmallows into the mouth one by one while saying the words "Chubby Bunny" during an event at a Chicago area fair. She inserted multiple marshmallows in quick succession as the crowd reacted. As the mass absorbed saliva, it expanded and reduced oral airflow. When she attempted to speak again, the marshmallows shifted backward and blocked the airway. She attempted to inhale and drew the sticky mass further against the throat opening. Observers believed she was still participating until she collapsed and lost muscle tone. Staff attempted the Heimlich maneuver, but the marshmallow plug did not expel. Emergency crews transported her to a hospital where resuscitation attempts failed. Death was pronounced shortly after arrival. The mechanism of death was asphyxiation from food bolus obstruction of the airway. The marshmallows melted into a soft, adhesive mass that sealed the upper airway and could not be pushed out by normal coughing or abdominal thrusts. Once airflow stopped, oxygen levels dropped, leading to loss of consciousness and irreversible injury. The event ended fatally because the challenge required deliberate overfilling of the mouth with material capable of sealing the airway. The Benadryl Challenge. On August 21, 2020, 15-year-old Chloe Phillips attempted the Benadryl TikTok Challenge, a trend in which participants ingest large doses of diphenhydramine to create hallucinations, after viewing several videos promoting the effect. She consumed roughly 14 tablets in a short period, several times higher than the recommended daily limit. Within a short time, she became restless and disoriented. Her heart rate rose and her movements became uncoordinated. She then developed a seizure and became unresponsive. Family members called emergency services when she failed to regain consciousness. Paramedics transported her to a hospital where she went into cardiac arrest. Resuscitation efforts were unsuccessful. Toxicology showed fatal diphenhydramine toxicity. The mechanism of death was lethal disturbance of heart rhythm caused by overdose. Diphenhydramine at high levels interferes with electrical signaling in the heart, producing arrhythmias that stop circulation. Once the heart ceased pumping, oxygen delivery ended and death followed. The event became fatal because the challenge required high intake of a drug that appears harmless at normal doses but becomes physiologically dangerous at the levels consumed. The Blackout Challenge. On April 7, 2022, 12-year-old Archie Battersby attempted the Blackout Challenge, an online trend in which participants restrict their own airflow to induce temporary loss of consciousness, while alone at his home in Essex. He used a ligature to compress the neck with the intent of cutting off air supply. At some point during the attempt, he lost voluntary control and could not release the pressure. He was later discovered by his mother in a non-responsive state with no purposeful movements. Emergency crews transported him to a hospital where he was placed on a ventilator. Imaging scans showed extensive and irreversible brain damage from prolonged lack of oxygen. Despite continued mechanical support, there was no detectable recovery of brain function. After legal proceedings, life support was withdrawn and death was recorded. The mechanism of death was hypoxic brain injury from sustained self-asphyxiation. When oxygen supply is cut off for several minutes, brain cells begin to die and damage cannot be reversed. In this case, the challenge led directly to a loss of airway control without supervision, resulting in permanent injury and death. The Tide Pod Challenge. On January 13, 2018, 17-year-old Logan Stiles attempted the Tide Pod Challenge, a viral dare in which participants bite into single-use laundry detergent capsules, while recording the act for social media. He placed the pod in his mouth and bit down, causing the membrane to rupture. The detergent mixture entered his mouth and triggered a gag reflex. During attempts to cough and swallow, fluid was drawn into his airway. The chemicals caused immediate burning and swelling inside the throat and lungs. His breathing became labored and then progressively weaker. He collapsed before an airway could be secured. He was transported to a hospital but could not be stabilized. The detergent caused chemical injury to the lung surfaces, preventing oxygen from moving into the blood. He died from respiratory failure caused by caustic aspiration. The mechanism of death was inhalation of detergent fluid during intentional rupture of the capsule. Surfactants inside the pods damaged lung tissue on contact. Once the lungs lost the ability to exchange oxygen, no intervention could reverse the injury. The fatal outcome occurred because the challenge required direct exposure of airway tissue to caustic cleaning agents. The Fire Challenge. On August 22, 2014, a 15-year-old boy in Buffalo, New York, attempted the Fire Challenge, a viral trend in which participants pour flammable liquid on the body and ignite it briefly while recording, inside his home bathroom while a friend filmed. He applied rubbing alcohol to his chest and torso, then lit the surface flame, expecting to extinguish it immediately with water. Within seconds, the fire spread faster than expected. The alcohol vapor ignited, producing a larger flame than the visible liquid suggested. His synthetic clothing also caught fire and adhered to his skin. He attempted to run to the shower, but the flame accelerated as airflow increased. Household members heard impact sounds and entered to find him on the floor with active flame. They smothered the fire with towels and called emergency services. He sustained extensive burns over more than 30% of his body. He was transported to a burn unit but died days later from complications of thermal injury and organ failure. The mechanism of death was systemic failure caused by deep burns sustained during intentional ignition for the challenge. The fatal event occurred because alcohol burns faster than it can be extinguished once ignited on skin and clothing, leaving no margin for control.